Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Marion Minor Cook Athenaeum. My name's Henry Long. I'm one of your 4 Athenaeum Fellows for the year. Tonight, sci-fi and fantasy publishing visionary Fabrice Guerrier will explore the world building in fiction and imagination. By embracing the notion of creolization, Guerrier will investigate how the blending of diverse cultural, intellectual, and social elements can forge new pathways for humanity. Guerrier is the award-winning founder of Syllble Studios, a pioneering sci-fi and fantasy production publishing house that develops diverse writing talent through collaborative world building. At Syllble, Guerrier leads a process of creating fictional worlds by connecting underrepresented creative writers, visual artists, and inspired creators from different countries, backgrounds, and cultures through artist collectives. Drawing from his cultural heritage and his interests in syncretism, creolization, Haitian futurism, African spiritual traditions, and world building, Guerrier's science fantasy shared world, Ayitiverse, aims to unravel the history of the world's first modern black nation, Haiti. Born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti in 1991, Guerrier moved to the United States at the young age of 13 in 2004. He holds a bachelor's in international affairs and a leadership studies certificate from Florida State University, as well as a master's in conflict transformation at Eastern Mennonite University's Center for Justice and Peace Building. While there, he helped found a local chapter of Coming to the Table, a national racial reconciliation organization founded by descendants of the enslaved and enslavers from the same plantation in the United States. He then went on to become the youngest national president of their board of directors. Guerrier is also the author of No More Vagabonds, No More Obscure Wars, poems from 2023, Medusa's Descendant from 2023, Breaking Free from Mass-Produced Consciousness, a little book for artists, entrepreneurs, and the leaders of tomorrow from 2021, and Golden Veins, a collection of stories from 2019. He was selected as a 2022 PEN Emerging Voices Fellow finalist and a PEN Haiti Fellow by PEN America. Guerrier was inducted into the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for art and style, delivered a TED Talk, and was named to the Root Magazine's 100 Most Influential African Americans. He lives in Los Angeles, California. Tonight, Guerrier will deliver the 2024 Golo Man Lecture, sponsored by our very own Gould Center for Humanistic Studies at CMC. Now at this time, we ask you to please silence your cell phones and direct your attention towards the speaker. As always, video and audio recording are strictly prohibited. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Fabrice Guerrier.
Hello, hello. I'll start setting this up real quick. Thank you so much for hosting this wonderful lecture. I'm so inspired to be on campus and see this vibrant energy of young people and professors really wrestling with important ideas that our planet desperately needs. I'm gonna set my timer real quick. So I'm gonna go over. Let's see. All right, I want to thank Amy Kind and Jessica for welcoming me today and the Gould Center for Humanistic Studies. And the title of the lecture I'll be giving today is called Worldbuilding as Future, Creolizing the Ruins of Modernity. Nowadays, building our world seems like an impossible feat. This impossibility seems tied to a future where we have become comfortably numb, only envisioning the most disastrous outcomes for a precious and tiny planet floating in the cosmic dark. A future that was promised to us, yet we witness the constant destruction of precious ecosystems every year. Acres upon acres of football fields are destroyed in the lush green forest of the Amazon. And similar devastation occur in the Great Lakes regions of Africa. Our spaceship Earth breaking heat records year after year after year. Given this, do we truly feel capable of addressing these issues, I ask? Building our world seems more difficult than the comfort of having to save it in one fell swoop, snapping our thumb and middle fingers, perhaps, wishing a magic spell, and those who claim to want to save it often do it out of a savior complex or a fear that the worst is always around the corner. That the worst of nuclear warfare that we've only understood, imagined, or seen in films or history books in our recent generation, in the fearful annals of a Ukrainian war happening now. It's more and more normalized and us feeling out of reach. Today we are drowned in an ocean of multitude of competing disasters. War has landed over our social media channels, war at the fingertips of our thumbs, scrolling, rendering us entirely numb to the enthusiasm of a future that has entirely disappeared. Gaza, Israel, Haiti, Trump. All these cosmic forces reaches out in our faces, holding our phones like a destructive comet, disintegrating its long tail in sparkles of cold, numbing ice, dropping as many anchors below our collective guts, rendering us unable to move, frozen, but only feeling more of a remorse, more of a unified anger, a unified anguish, only feeling a sense of helplessness that speaking out by posting could perhaps be enough. Just maybe, we tell ourselves, just maybe it could reach those insidious forces that sustain it all. Building our world seems like an impossible feat, with our future completely flattened by waves of anxiety freezing us. A flattened future by constant doomerism in our minds when we turn on our television screen, flattened by the felt promises of growing up in a nation that stood for so much freedom for those around the world. But it has become more of a shadow to a hope, a dream dance, a freedom vision extinguished by political malaise clouding, hovering over us, then striking lightning, shattering what connects us to each other. A political machine that stands for so much goodness of order, yet has by its measures has a dreaded slowness, with now just a signature on a piece of paper undoing decades of progress. Rigid national mechanism not adapted to emergent strategies, and global mechanism we're all crying for. Its polarization has stranded us to an island where we don't see each other anymore, ideologically. The bridges between us have collapsed. Critical thinking gone in this island, stranded we are to new ideas, to new concepts, to new visions. It all ceases to be. How can we feel grounded in the bones of our body in these times? How can we take upon ourselves to change it? It no longer feels possible. Has our future gone so much astray when so much of our world's modernity and progress seems to go against our human nature? I ask, can we ever remedy it all? Excuse me if I've taken such a dark turn here, but I wanted to set the stage. Building our world. These words seemingly looks like revolutionary, gigantic steps that one must take to overcome deep historical forces. Must we be Alexander the Great, who conquered so many worlds and lands, yet left so much bloodshed in the way? Or must we be Martin Luther King Jr. of our times, a priestly figure who praised an invincible dream, seeing a mountaintop, free at last, free at last, free at last? Are we free? Must we be a Jean-Michel Basquiat who painted over thousands of works of art, pushing the boundaries of race, culture, and identity? Must we be Jackson Pollock, whose abstract expressionist paintings has too shifted the world? Must we be a Toni Morrison, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1993, whose prophetic prose has shattered the literary world's saturation with whiteness, portraying African American lives with full complexity and beauty? What about our personal wants? Our day to day and the Earth axis spinning its revolution with the surrounding sun? Do we feel numb and guilt ridden while spending time with our loved ones? I sometimes do. Simply brewing coffee in the morning, blowing wind to a hot Moroccan tea, or binge watching our favorite trash show through the immeasurable numbers of streaming services nowadays, while the world seems so in disarray. Has there ever been a template for us to build our world? For those grand achievers who are nonetheless not perfect, nor any different than us, the Gandhis of nonviolence, helping to liberate his nation of India from British rule, the Louis Armstrong, jazz trumpeter, scat singer, creating art as a civil rights activist, the Jane Austen writers turning new literary realism style on its head, advocating social commentary from a woman's perspective, the Hannah Arendt who escaped the death camps of the Holocaust, and perhaps one of the greatest political theorists of all times, the James Baldwin who expatriated to Paris, knowing he would be more accepted there to write and imagine his world, the Octavia Butler who took her Afrofuturism to imagine prophecy for a new earth seed religion and layered the groundwork for writers like myself, the Audre Lorde, the Black queer feminist poet and activist who fought against so much of our world's heteronormativity and proclaimed the power and beauty of difference and of the erotic. Has there ever been a template left for us for building our world? And is it even possible today? And what does it look like? We are at a cosmic impasse on a planetary scale. Mark Fisher, cultural theorist, says we are trapped in the 20th century. To be in the 21st century is to have 20th century culture on higher definition screen. 20th century culture and imaginations distributed to us through high-speed internet, extolling that we are being trapped in time. In a world that is not ours, in the 21st century as we know it, it is yet to be seen. Trapped in what Michel Foucault called epistemes, the guiding unconsciousness of subjectivity within a specific epoch. Individual eras onto which we can no longer imagine new ideas, or worse, certain ideas cannot enter. They're inconceivable and remain unimaginable because of the era and the type of world we live in. Must we be condemned to the slow cancellation of our souls? The slow cancellation and imprisonment of our attention, the death of our human imagination, and the worst, erasing this prosperous and hopeful future that I believe is deeply possible for our spaceship Earth. Then I must ask, what made these individuals, these movers and shakers of history, of social movements, these stallions of justice galloping to the end of times within themselves to dream new things, to hold capacities that others could not? Do we within us hold the vision to see beyond what has trapped us? I'm here to claim that they were master world builders and that they knew that their world had to be shared with others. And the physical world existed within themselves. It began and ended within their imagination. And that the world they grew to build within the crevices of their souls and in community with others was tied to a deeply political, creative, and ontological agency of existential proportions. They knew that their times demanded out of them the utmost care, the utmost patience, the utmost risk, the utmost curiosity to dream more than they ever could, to grow, to love, to embrace that which could not be embraced, to embrace that which could not be understood yet. They knew how to integrate all the varied aspects of the world around them, to move into being an impossible and unshakable future they saw rising from within. I grew up in a world very different from this one, a world called Haiti. A beautiful place surrounded by miles of blue oceans that waves on and on, a salty sense in the air all throughout. Mountainous lands filled with life, love, jazz, compas that moves the body, incredibly spicy food that held our breaths of pickles, laughters that gave tears, and rich traditions that tied me like an umbilical cord to our revolutionary history of being the first black modern nation. It was the second modern nation in the Western Hemisphere after the US. It was where the first university, the first church cathedral, the first theater was ever built in the Americas. I grew up in a middle-class family in Port-au-Prince, its capital during the 90s. It was a place where electricity was only given just 1 or 2 hours a day. But this taught us the value of conservation. And this lack of electricity, as incomprehensible as it might seem to us in the US, brought into my growing up childhood something very magical. A deep relationship with the stars above. An intimate relationship with the outer realms that seems so out of reach today whenever venturing out to the streets of Los Angeles or New York City. The three wise men from the Orient Belt, the three shining stars aligned, I could see them wherever I went on the clear sky. The lion, the great bear, the swan, the scorpion, the water bear. I could see these constellations in Haiti. They were my childhood. I could even see the melding thickness, the clusters of yellow, orange, purplish stars, beaming the cosmic tail of the Milky Way galaxy, splitting the Haitian sky into half. This changed in me something profound, to see beyond this earth, to dream of space beyond our time. There is so much magic in Haiti. Deep tropical rain showers and seemingly infinite amount of Caribbean green frogs singing as a natural orchestra. Swirling clouds, insects and bees buzzing on red hibiscus flowers. Yellow birds, brown garden snakes, green lizards of all kinds, all moving to a universal beat. It surrounded me and I was in constant awe. I always said nature was my first teacher. I grew up with the freshness of our brown potatoes, green parsley, yellow corn, green cabbage, red tomatoes, green habanero peppers, and yellow-orange mangoes, all freshly grown by local Haitian farmers and brought from the market. It taught me the value of our meals, which took more than 6 hours to cook. 6 hours. And they were not to be taken granted. We even killed our poultry. I was there with our maid watching the bird flap on the floor after it was killed, then seeing its feathers slowly being plucked after hot water was poured over its lifeless body. Its naked body was cut to pieces, then carefully cleaned with pieces of green lime that she squeezed with her finger all over, and sauteed the meat with gigantic garlic cloves and other spices that were crushed together in a brown wooden mortar and pesto. It cooked for hours. We all knew as the smell invaded our home that what we ate was part of a bigger pattern of life, a bigger pattern of nature and this universal beat, and that its life would be honored when my family and I sat down at the dinner table. My upbringing wasn't entirely a haven. The deep political and cultural wounds of this first black nation were fueled by the grueling forces of a global economic system that widened income and wealth disparities, where the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. The West is insistent on a particular imagined form of governance and ways of living and doing things. A race to the bottom with cheap labors and lax laws, and the unhealed intergenerational trauma reaching back from the past like gigantic hands covering part of our eyes, squeezing our hearts, extinguishing so much. All of this contributed to the feeling that the world was against us. The poverty of dreams deferred, the corruption of Haitian men selfishly ingrained in systems that thrive at the expense of the little people, all made living on the island an unstable experience. In 2004, we left. My family and I moved the year of the coup d'etat amidst the inflation, the instability of daily life that followed, and the rapidly increasing shooting violence. I remember the day we flew over the earth, crossing the blue Caribbean Ocean waves on the American Airlines. I remember when we landed, everyone around us clapped at the miracle of a piece of metal flying into the sky and our safe arrival. A deep sadness and deep excitement both consumed my heart. Coming to the US felt like it would be a new beginning. Reminiscent of the carefree experiences of summer vacation I had spent in Florida with my brothers, I thought it would be an eternal summer. I was wrong. It was indeed a new world, and little did I know I would understand this world, feel it, navigate it, how I would conceive of it, how badly I wanted to fit into the great American checkboxes. Inside of that box, inside those lines, to belong to it. I thought that by belonging, I would be normal. I would be less different and perhaps feel less pain and less isolation. Yet what I didn't know was that this world lay dormant in me and had already claimed my imagination long before I ever got here. Through its cinema, through the films of American and Western culture I watched while it was in Haiti. These films shaped and defined for me the astronomical vision of this magical American land stood for in its people's dreams and how it defined itself as the apex of modernity. I remember the world of Home Alone, a very young kid left alone in a giant American house, left behind by their parents who were enthralled in their lives and work. And now this young kid was tasked with fighting off robbers. I remember Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. I remember Jumanji, RoboCop, Back to the Future, The Terminator, Batman. I devoured them all. What about the Disney classics, Toy Story, Aladdin, or Parent Trap? I devoured them all. Yet it was these worlds that devoured me. All of these characters dreaming, willing, achieving in their own stories. I never saw myself reflected in these worlds. Yet I wanted to live in them. I wanted to live them out so badly. It was as if I was prey to these unknown imaginative forces inside of me. Florida was unlike Haiti. Although the houses were clean, orderly, there were no mountains I could see, and the horizon expanded a flatness in every direction. I could not hear the dogs and roosters cajoling at night or in the morning, but only cars. The stars in the vastness of the Milky Way disappeared, leading me to feel like I had literally entered the Matrix. Foods like McDonald's that I enjoyed from time to time were ready and made less than in 5 minutes. I thought it was magic. Florida was unlike Haiti. I knew none of my neighbors, and they did not wave back at me when I looked at them. This world was bleak. Immediately upon arriving, my father worked 3 jobs and my mother's cleaned toilets. We went from middle class in Haiti to poverty in the US, the classic American immigrant story that has become an iconic vision for this nation, a story that I proudly wear on my shoulders. Despite all of this, I grew to hate the skin of my color. I resented my past because my deep attempt to belong, to fit in the box, was blocked by my peers' perception that the Haiti I knew and loved so dearly, in their mind, was a Haiti of disaster, a Haiti of poverty, a Haiti of absolute horror and violence. They saw me as that. This created an erasure of something profound in me, an erasure of my will, my dignity, the complexity and all dimension that lived inside of me. In claiming of modernity, there's a tendency to make everything uniform, to turn beings into mere objects, to apply the same standards everywhere, to move away from spiritual influences. This trend can be traced back all the way to the ancient Greco-Roman philosophies, then to the expansions of rights during the era of the Magna Carta, then the Western Enlightenment, then later to economic values that emerged through the Industrial Revolution. Now, in present day, these influences are spread at the touch of a button through our phones and media. I can feel the echoes of the past ideas within me, shaping the standards I've tried so hard to meet. I worked at the Northwest Regional Library in Broward County almost every weekend for 5 years. It became an existential refuge. As a page, I would roll the gray, creaking metal cart through the library, glancing inside old, gigantic books. I traveled to worlds I had never heard of. From China's terracotta army, seeing the collection of terracotta sculptures depicting the armies of Qi Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. In the East it was, to Chile in the global South, home to Nobel Prize in Literature poet Pablo Neruda, all the way to the giant heads of the Easter Island and the Polynesian Islands, the pyramids of Egypt, even all the way back in history to the Roman empires, the Aztec empire, the Mesopotamian empires. I spent considerable time in the comic book section too, flipping pages and traveling to far-off galaxies in large Star Trek-like spaceships, immersing myself in distant societies where technology had merged entirely with mind and body, where extraterrestrials had learned new languages and ways of doing things. Through these books and their immense, vast worlds, I began to see and feel the same magic of the natural world that I grew up in Haiti. Books became my second teacher. Yet I was a bystander, never a participant, never an agent, never a dreamer of my own might, since most of the characters in at least the fiction books and comics and manga did not look like me nor shared my values. I wanted to fit in those boxes so badly, even if it meant that I ceased to exist as an original being, as a Black Haitian. Yet it wasn't until many years later, many years, when Trayvon Martin was tragically shot and killed in 2012, that I began to realize that the boxes, the lines of this world that I'd so much wanted to accept and live in were never designed for me. My Black body was not something that could be contained, and this erasure prevented me from imagining myself new ideas, new values, new ways of being that cut deeply like a cosmic spear to the center of my soul and could reach out to the outer realms of our political, social, and cultural systems of our modern era. And for this, I began to uncover the multitudes of myself, my history, and my character. I began to realize that the deep values of stories, memories, myths, and lores from the Haitian land of which I grew up on the island were deeply important to my becoming. It made me realize time and time again that when I don't imagine for myself, when I don't create my own worlds, when I don't take upon myself to engage in futures, then the imagination and values of others in the past will do it for me. Toni Morrison has been a prime example of someone who centered her creativity, her vision, and her aspiration, and really shows why building the world building is an incredible, valuable aspect for a future. In 1996, she delivered the 20th Jefferson Lecture in Humanities, titling her lecture, The Future of Time. She proclaimed that any far future any imagined far future has been a desperate exercise, as she put it, to alter the present as past. That it gave no creative powers we hold as human species to transform and evolve ourselves. She claimed this inclination towards the past locks us to a staring contest. She asserted that our tendency to view the past through the lens of technology's future confines us to a disturbing context that is now deeply embedded in the very fabric of our imagination, preventing us from comprehending the past, preventing us from foreseeing the future or actively inhabiting it. Morrison said, in the West, we look to the past as if it's a slow-moving progress bar, living inside what I'm calling a cult of progress, a singular modality that we humans exist at the forefront of better things to come, to bring only the horrors of our history to remain in an effort to bypass them. It offers nothing for the future of humanity, she says. We are stuck in a loop. It locks us to a frame of mind, and our thinking is seemingly bounded perpetually to a single tune, to the ways we must evolve and what once was, not the actual future. We can never truly see the future in the West, she says, but an endless aiming, we are imprisoned towards a time without a future, like Mark Fisher has says. Tony points to the prefixes of different eras: postmodern, post-structuralist, post-Cold War, that has heavily been used in our Western culture to signify the ever-so presence of our reimagining the future of our present as past. Post-World War II, we progress beyond the bombs we drop on over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, exploding and disintegrating over 200,000 Japanese men, women, children, and families, all but to halt a great evil, the axis of evil from advancing, threatening our progress we had made. Post-colonial, beyond the African slaves who were forcibly transported in chains, subjected to torture and body mutilation across the Caribbean, the Americas, and the US, while laboring on plantations that underpin a historical slave-based economy. In the 21st century, Toni Morrison says we are living in a time where the afterlife is seen to be an absurd medical impossibility. Within intellectual and literary discourses, the idea of an indestructible soul is not only hard to accept, but is also growing increasingly incomprehensible. Where deeply held religious belief has now become synonymous with complete ignorance, where the suspicion of eternal life to the absence of resurrection of the living, and the reincarnation of the soul that once casted humanity to all times to come. This seemingly, Morrison says, all of this condemns us to a biological space of a very single life. A human being now bound to death and a void-filled mind, constraining our ability to create meaning even more. We thus, as humans, for the first time in our history, are decomposing things, waiting to be buried in an ocean of nihilism. Our brains lobotomize away from the very magic of our universe, disconnected from our past, disconnected from our future, most importantly, disconnected from each other, because we've been fragmented by this modernity. Morrison says this future in the West now becomes a very discoverable physical space. Since we are no longer thrusted to all times and are increasingly disconnected from each other, it is then to this outer space we seek, towards the stars in the sky. Not as stardust we are, not like the relationship I had with the cosmos and my child in Haiti. In this age dominated by Elon Musk's SpaceX spaceships, I was mesmerized by the Mars rover's mission, the remarkable landing of Perseverance in 2021. I was deeply enthralled by the vivid imagery and discovery of this new, expensive, distant horizon, seeing our own sun through the cloudy Martian skies. The red mountains, the Martian sands, captured for the very first time in our human history. The exploration of the Durazo crater on Mars allowed us to peer into mysteries of the Martian red planet like never before. Yet Morrison points that to see this is in fact a future towards the discovery of more past time. Yes, more past time. The discovery of billions of years gone by since the start of the universe, as claimed by our Western sciences and our modernity. I pose this question then. If what we perceive as modern progress is increasingly at odds with our human nature, leading to significant disconnections amongst ourselves, within ourselves and with the planet, and while we are banished to a single time, a time without a future, as Toni Morrison says, then I ask, where is the future? Where is this future? I want to take a moment to take H.G. Wells' metallic time machine with levers and dials to time travel back to the slave plantation of Saint-Domingue in the 1790s, which later became Haiti. The first successful slave rebellion in the Americas that historian Julius Scott shows us was the spark that led to the abolition of slavery to the entire Western Hemisphere. When I started to uncover more of my past as a medium for shaping my world, The tools for my world building directly came from the African slaves who lived in that colony of Saint-Domingue. They were my ancestors, and their act of marronage, this marooning, escaping the plantation to find freedom in the mountains despite all the risk, needs to be applied to our modern world. I began to realize that this modernity we so deeply care for is imbued with the same level of oppression they endured. Our bodies today might not succumb to the mutiny of working endlessly from morning to night in these horrible dehumanizing spaces, but our minds and our imagination yields the same tensions in modern times. We must maroon ourselves to our own mountaintops, where the precious essence of our inner life and newly imagined visions lie. To creolize something is to mutate it, bringing different parts together to imagine new worlds that might rise. Creolization was another tool for the slave, as they knew they had different languages, histories, and ways of thinking. Imagine a scenario where a German, a French, and a Chinese person find themselves on a slave plantation. Each person brings their unique traditions and language, much like the diverse African individuals brought to work on the plantation in Saint-Domingue were from different groups. Despite their different origins, they must unite, combining their collective experiences and backgrounds to break down the barriers of language, history, and culture. Together, they must create something new and expand beyond their individual perspectives. I see creolization as an essential part of world building, being able to pull from different backgrounds, tools, experiences, values, and teachings to rise to new heights and gain visions like the African slave had. New vision towards something more profound, more truthful, more beautiful, more free. If I may make this provocative statement, I believe the slave plantation never disappeared. No matter what your background, age, or culture might be, no one is immune to the specters of the slave plantation that still haunts us today and serve as a cornerstone to the ruins of modernity. It operates in the crevices of our imagination. How we think, how we feel, and see things around us are but an appendage demonstrated by the level of disaster and disarray our planet is currently undertaking. And the poly crises we face today, seemingly despite all the progress we have made thus far in its cult. This ontological extraction of our temporality, our attention, I believe, fuels our deep mental health crisis. How we feel down, depressed, disconnected from our community. This self-negation is not natural, but it is tied to the lost art of needing to escape and embracing fugitivity that is necessary to confront ourselves in the world that harbors in us. Just like the slave revolutionaries on the island of Saint-Domingue, birthing the first black nation of Haiti, we need to escape and root out the conditions of horror and dystopia in our minds first. We need to transmute and creolize the conditions of horror and dystopia in our imagination, in our psyche, in our relationships, to build a life of freedom for ourselves despite the conditions of destruction that lingers in a futureless world. Can you imagine for a second being a black African slave, dreaming of freedom in a world where everywhere they look, major societal powers like France, Britain, the United States, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands all sold black bodies? And the entire system was designed along the box and line, shaping this web of dehumanization of everyone involved in it, within it. I claim here that we must use the same tools that the Haitian slaves used to retreat within themselves to find the edges of their oppressive world and history in themselves, to properly imagine a future where they could be free and new society could rise. They first had to expand in their spirit of what we need to cultivate in what I call the marronage soul. It's at the root of the world builder spirit, a foregoing of the outer world and a retreat to the inner world as a necessary step to recreate, to reimagine, confront, and evolve our society. When I founded Syllble Studios, my science fiction and fantasy production and publishing house, I wanted to bring writers and artists together in form of creative protest. Imagine sitting in a classroom, a Zoom room, or a public space with others you know and have never met before. Picture a diverse group of hearts and minds from different cultures, ages, and backgrounds beginning to imagine completely new worlds together. Yes, this is what my artistic practice consists of. Imagining new worlds we have not seen before. Worlds that tell us stories like sharp arrows that break through the malaise of our time. Imagining new realities as portals that you can immerse in to see what other worlds could look like for yourself. And experimenting with the endless possibilities of choices previously hidden. Breaking boundaries that might seem impossible for a world today. Well, let's start with a planet and space. It can be an Earth analog or a newly imagined one. Is it a planet completely made out of ice or hot lava? What about a planet that is completely gaseous with floating cities and bodies? How about a planet filled with diamonds? With diamond walls, diamond spoons, diamond oceans, through which metallic boat-like engines move? Maybe it's a place with mountains of gold. Is every grain of dirt made of gold? What is the physics of this new world? Does it adhere to our understanding of physics with gravity? How does it function? Should we invite theoretical physicists into the mix so they can share their science and perspective, allowing us to agree with our collaborators on what expression we want this world to really look like? In its vast ecosystem, its fauna and plant life, is it like the Caribbean Sky Island world that I helped create with Caribbean writers back in 2021, where the Caribbean islands undergo the leveling a few times a year? They all lift up into the deep sky, coming together like puzzle pieces to escape rising sea levels and hurricanes. And with their leaves and fauna serving as biological solar panels that charge up the entire island with free energy, even when they go back down separately. Okay, what about our imagined planet? What about the beings in that planet? What do they look like? How do they communicate with each other? Is it like the Khoisan language, click sounds of African indigenous groups? How do they express anger, sadness, love? Are there new emotions we don't recognize? Can these beings fly? Do they crawl in our imagined world? Where do these beings live? What are the implications if they live at the edge of a fuming volcano? Have their skins evolved a hardened surface to sustain the heat? Is a form of geothermal energy powering their homes in their volcanic city? Do we need to bring in an expert or do research to look at the power of geothermal energy and how it changes our systems for the better? How about the One Humanity World at Syllable, in collaboration with the Innovation Station at State, created by a collective of women and non-binary writers from around the world in US states, including Australia, Brazil, New Zealand, California, Louisiana, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Alaska. They all explored solutions to our climate crisis and our natural ecosystems, destructions that is happening today through the creation of the One Humanity World, a futuristic sci-fi world that imagines planet Earth in 2070. They collaborated with experts and scientists from Yale University, USC, Oxford, and many leading organizations on the front line of climate change. I believe the world-building process is a radical permission to dream with others, to give ourselves permissions to bring our full selves, our intellect, our intuitions, our beingness, to hear out others in an imaginative way. In a way I have seen time and time again that slowly unpeels all the biases and beliefs we begin to learn and adopt as we grow up in this society. Foregoing the archetype of childhood, so necessary for our imagination. Children haven't been taught yet to limit their thinking in different ways, always finding new possibilities, new outcomes, and new reasons to immerse themselves. In our imagined world, how do these beings deal with conflict? Do they send members of their community to the bottom of the ocean as a punitive form of justice, separating them from the community? What long-term effects does that create? whether it's 100 years, thousands of years, or even 100,000 years? Or is their justice framework in dealing with conflict focuses on restorative practice, aiming to repair the rifts in their community? Yet, is there a group in our world that disagrees with that restorative justice practice? How is this rising conflict dealt with? And the most important aspect of this, how would you personally deal with it if you lived in that world? These are the type of questions that stimulate growth, stimulate the types of meaning making essential to being human. What about time in our imagined world? Does it move slowly or quickly? How does it affect the cities and people? How do different conceptions of times affect how people relate to each other? The Southie world, created at Syllble by 10 African sci-fi and fantasy writers and artists, features a phenomenon called chronodysmorphation, the distortion of time and a place, making it unstable and merging past, present, and future. This effect can be observed in the environment in one of the planets in the Southie world, such as Maui, that was destroyed by an experiment in time magic. Additionally, consider Nakoko, a creature believed to consume time. Worlds are bridges to the unknown of ourselves, expanding, growing, changing. I see vast new fictional worlds positioning us as human archaeologists, as space travelers. We're world building as if we were like the indigenous Africans hundreds of thousands of years ago in communities, telling stories, our stories, new stories, venturing out to new lands and connecting deeply to uncover new realms and heed new mythologies. Something deeply human, lost today in our time without a future. Building our world is about building ourselves, those closest to us, and the precious flames of the soul that heat so much of our imagination for the future, and new, seemingly unreasonable and necessary visions that might not always make sense, but they reach in us something deeply. Building our world is about learning the necessary language to build healthier democracies and how we relate with one another, yet it starts with us. World building creates the level of change required of us to push back from the world and what it has harbored inside of us. It requires an individual in relation to themselves who has reached their mountaintop to be able to push back from the legacies of the past and the specters of the slave plantation. As a Black immigrant, I had come to accept what it means to be an American for myself. Not the Americanness that was never designed for me, but was placed on to oppress me and propelled an endless self-negation of my mental, creative, and world-building agency. I had to push back, and you should too. World building, this act of imagination that is so deeply rooted in the realm of science fiction and fantasy, storytelling and entertainment, is an act of creation with capital C. Within us, it involves claiming these primal forces that are closely tied to how our agency functions, and our meaning-making capacity, our sense of self, and the creation of new values evolving, and how we believe our role in co-creating our society. World building has taught me that we are not special as humans, that we are part of the cosmos and the spaceship Earth, that we are part of the whole of existence, that our role is to surrender to the unexplainable vision that our existence doesn't necessarily end at the skin of our bodies or our Cartesian mind, that we are porous beings, ecological beings where all melds together from our imaginations, our souls, our livings, our values, our identities, our emotions, our past histories, our brains, our subconscious, our biologies, layers of bones and blood, our societies and cultural understanding, all the interdisciplinary realms continually shaping meaning exist simultaneously. We are that ecology, and it is moving us beyond the Hegelian dialectic that as humans we are innate world builders. In recognizing this process, we can claim and enter the crossroads of time and space to where we can welcome the beginning of possible futures. I don't believe that building our world is an impossible feat. I don't believe being trapped in time by the 20th century, and our cult of progress is a perpetual destiny. I don't believe people are stupid or wholly ignorant of their capacity to build our world. I don't believe it's solely an affair of our education system, as if more educated people would solve everything. Rather, I believe it's the political, social, and cultural imaginations of modernity unto which we have been pigeonholed that tells us that this version of reality is possible because this is the only version of reality possible, because it's the way it has always been done. This, I believe, has deeply eroded the magic in our belief that the world can profoundly change for the better. Why wait for many generations to see the seeds of change if we can imagine within ourselves and with others? That's what it takes. That's what it truly takes to build our world. We need to interrogate this deeply within us. If you remember only one thing from my lecture, let it be this. Ask yourself, if our very world ends and begins inside of us, what are the implications for building it? World building is not just a playful thing. It's a deeply intimate practice that we must forge within ourselves to dismantle oppressive systems and move beyond the outdated ruins of the 20th century. One must first do the inner work. One must remember the Marana's soul and embrace becoming the truest, most honest, most authentic expression of themselves in the creation of new worlds. Only then can we create the proper inner space to deal with and push the lines within which the world has traced between you and I. Only then, I believe, can we show up with others to attempt to merge, to mix, to creolize, and to create new futures. Think for a second. You're creating a new world, mutating, reshaping, remixing, integrating your vision while hearing others in the process. For me, when I began Syllble, a synthesis of values occurred. I realized I had agency to show up in this world and see behind the scenes the operating system of our planet as old software like Windows 1995. For me, any act of art making is a profound act of world building. And claiming world building as a practice has broken the walls I had placed within myself, stripped away the barriers our culture has forced upon me. I ask, why are academic and industrial and creative discipline not in conversation with each other? Why is knowledge so siloed? What does it look like to bring together a literature major, a mathematician, a law student, an architect, a painter, an activist, an historian in one room to imagine what a world could look like? What potential and hopeful futures for a planet could we uncover? This is the power of collaborative world building, to meld academic backgrounds, genres, and ideas across intellectual, social, and cultural traditions. I will end with this. To find this universal beat to connect us all. To become master world builders, we must. To pierce to the episteme of the 20th century, to build our possible hopeful futures of our spaceship Earth and uncover the pure 21st century is marked by deep optimism and an unprecedented connectivity and collaboration. It all requires of us a new language for transformation. We must come together to harness the power of a collective genius to rise to something new. It starts inside of you, and it starts now. These systems are imaginative in nature. They love to harbor a solid form, a solid mess, a solid fog, hidden in ontological, ethical, and epistemic boxes. For them to continue, for them to exist in our collective society, they have to be sustained by us in our obsession with modernity's progress. And thus we can choose to perpetuate them or be blinded by the necessary unconsciousness of subjectivity. Time and time again, I have come to believe that inner change creates outer change. If we are able to see that someone like Martin Luther King decided to push back within himself against the status quo of a racially unjust society, that Cesar Chavez pushed back against undignified wages and conditions, that Toni Morrison decided to focus her work on African American lives, we can understand that world building is about claiming your visions as central and letting the planet move towards the possibility that change has already happened inside of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk, Fabrice Guerrier. We'll now be moving into the Q&A portion of the evening. So if you have a question for our speaker, please line up against one of the two walls here tonight. We'll be alternating between the two sides. When you get up, feel free to introduce yourself, say your name, what year you are, what you're studying, what school you're from. Looking forward to hearing all of your questions tonight.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was incredibly interesting. A lot of what you said actually reminded me of a course that we have here at CMC. It's called Philosophy Through Literature. It's taught by Dr. Brianna Toole. Everyone in this room should take it. But she talks a lot about world building, specifically like Maria Lugonis's concepts, and also like the same ideas you articulated in that by bringing people from different experiences and expertises together, you can form this process of conscientization and consciousness raising. And so I was wondering, like, for you, does it come through the same idea of, like, we have to overcome our constraints? Like, I think for you, you described it as, like, the metaphorical slave plantation. And if so, how do you think, like, bringing together such a diversity of opinions helps make, like, what's metaphorical actualized and then allows us to engage in these liberatory processes?
Thank you so much for that question. I think to answer your question, I think I'm reminded of COVID. And I remember that I was thinking that COVID as a global epidemic, I think could have been solved in less than 6 months. But I think the way of which we actualized that impact was very like old school, where the nation state wanted to affect change. One corporations was doing the level of change. Other nations were sharing their information. And it seems that as a planet, we're entering in a new era where this sort of the idea of the lone genius or the individual, the sort of heroic visions of being in this singularity is no longer appropriate for the complexity and how things emerge. So I deeply feel that bringing multiple like backgrounds together is a natural way to sort of rise to the demand. For COVID, like we know deeply that we need people from across the realms of industries and political realms, and it doesn't necessarily target a specific person. Yes, like marginalized folks were more affected by that, but I think the level of change required a reimagining how to look at global changes, and I think we don't have that language yet. So I think world building indirectly sort of provides a space so we can welcome in new ideas and kind of see this very complex vision. It's like, how do we understand the language of complexity and chaos, and how can we be nimble and adapt to what's emerging?
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emma Merck, and I work for the Gold Center. I wrote my thesis in the fall where I was writing a fiction piece, and I did I struggled a lot with world building. So you talked about humanity in your talk and the importance of that. And I was just kind of wondering, like, how much of world building is intentional and how much of it is like more innate in the sense that humanity comes from within, or how much did you have to think about putting humanity in your world building, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of it is that when we see things through our own minds, I think we have a lot of limitations. I think there's this deep magic in being human, and we can dream and imagine and exist in so many ways. But I think something more happens when we're able to sort of reconcile the things that we don't have inside of us, when we meet with another person, when we meet with 3 other people, when we meet with other 4 people. I feel like the practice of world building for me, especially when I started to world build with others, I think it was much smoother. Obviously, there were challenges for sure of synthesis and getting these ideas out to the table where we could all agree. But I do feel that this sort of classical vision of writing where writers today believe when if I wake up, I'm gonna write my own novel and I'm gonna write my own world. And I think that's very classical. And yes, there's beauty to it, but there's a lot of challenges where it leaves out a lot of voice. I think earlier in the talk with the fellows, I gave the statistic that 98% of people who want to write a book never writes the book because it's an incredibly difficult thing. And I feel like thinking about it more in a more collaborative way allows more space for more voices to enter the table. So I would implore you to even find collaborators or friends to like start to share your ideas in the world. And I think to answer your question directly, I think it's sort of the chicken and the egg. I personally feel like any act of art is a world that's waiting to be discovered. It's just that we're sort of harnessing it from like that specific medium. I think there's an essence inside of us, and we carry that essence through words or through an art or a painting or a song. But I do feel it's tied to a world, and that world could essentially be that space inside of us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Yukaya. I'm a first year at Pitzer. Did a lot of thinking while you were speaking and wrote a lot of things down. And I guess specifically, I was thinking about our current like political system and how so many people who have the power to make change right now are really constrained by what they see as possible. And I'm curious how you would recommend normalizing and implementing this idea of world building into the systems that are already existing so that the people who already have power can start to grow their imagination and their minds of what is possible in the world that they are contributing to.
Absolutely. I think there's many ways to go about this. I'm in light of I'm in the tradition that I feel like the sort of current political process is almost antiquated. And I think it's yes, go out and vote. That is necessary. I'm not saying not to vote. And I think that's critical. But I feel like it behooves us not to search for new forms of power and new forms of change. And how do we express these new forms of power more boldly? So I said this earlier, but I feel like it's is the quote by Stacey Abrams that says like voting will not save us from harm, but silence will damn us all. I think that's an important framework, but I don't feel that profound revolutionary change is gonna come through like the political process. I think the political process is gonna help. It's necessary, and democracies are hard, and you have to work at it over time. But I do feel with the rapid change of our planet, where we're so interconnected in so many ways, that it requires a new way of looking at change. It's almost as if it's like, I want to tie my humanity with someone in Africa, someone in Chile, someone in Paris, someone in China. I want to tie my inextricable destiny with these beings that are across the border. But how do I do that? How do I do that where I'm present in my community? How do I do that while I'm present with the people around me? But like, and I think that's conversations we were having at a table earlier. It's like, how do we have that language? So I think that I don't want to change the current politicians that exist in Congress and the Senate. I think the system sort of exists for a reason. Those levers of change. It's not perfect, but I don't know if it's my battle. I think the battle is like, how do we empower each other to express ourselves more boldly so we can create the levels of change that we have not yet seen. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Fabrice. Thanks so much for your talk. Really inspiring and powerful. So I wanted to ask you to connect some dots for us about the two different notions of world building that I think are going on in your talk. So on the one hand, we're talking about like building our world, right? And imagining things about our world and change and power. And then on the other hand, we're talking about world building in science fiction where we're messing with time and time demons and so on. And so I guess I'd love to hear some about how that kind of fantastical world building helps us to build our world. Like what are the dots that you see connecting them? I I see like so many different ways that we can connect them, and I'm interested in how you want to do that.
Absolutely. I think on a personal level, I think it connects with agency. Like, what does it mean to have agency? What does it mean to believe that I can go out in my community and run for mayor and win and perhaps beat out some of the old dinosaurs in the Congress right now? Like, do you believe that you can do that? And if you don't believe, then why not? Why don't you believe that? So I think for me, the process of world building and imagining new worlds and new ways of beings and times and physics and species and societies, I think is deeply tied to agency. And I think as a creative being, that agency bleeds into how we can construct and build our physical society. So I think agency is the crossroads where I believe the work of world building emboldens someone to see behind the scenes and make connections where they would otherwise connect. So I think it's about sort of capacity building as a social change agent. That's why I said it's deeply tied to creating healthier democracies. I think because we tend to believe that these types of bigger change are so outside of us, but it's like we the people, like it's almost as if it's like the power is not necessarily in the Senate and Congress. Like, we are the people who are electing, ideally we're electing our leaders. And I think at the basis of that agency has been stripped away from us. And I think world building kind of sort of like taps us back into what's inside of us, because we talked a lot about social media in our table as like one of the biggest issues of our time. That's kind of shifting how we connect with each other. And because of that, this level of profound change cannot happen. So I feel like we have to imagine new worlds to be able to unpeel the biases and the layers that we grew up and adopting in our society, and not believing that this is the only version of reality. I think just by the fact of constructing a new world, there's a profound ontological agency that we get and we gain, and that is not going to be taken away very easily.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
My question, well, in case we're waiting for more questions, my question is, how can we, kind of as a society, engage in the process of shared world building if we don't have a shared conception of what it is, what's good for us as humans?
I always default to love. I always default to the idea that, like, as humans, we have to lead with love. I think we have to lead with I think it starts with what excites us the most. And moving from that excitement, we can start to connect with other people. I think it's a very difficult question, and the process is really just, I think going back to what Toni Morrison was talking about, I think she kind of hinted at that when she was saying that we're living in a society where we don't believe in the soul anymore, where things are becoming more secularized, or there's these big cosmic changes and we don't know why they're happening. And I feel like there's a little bit of messiness to what you're demanding. It's not clear cut, and it might be irrational. It might not make sense. And it's like, how are we comfortable with things that don't make sense, things that are unreasonable, things that are perhaps not as clear cut as we would like it to be. And it's like, I think through the chaos, like, beauty and love and these bigger forces can be discovered. But it's like, how are we comfortable with that? And I think that's sort of the language that we're sort of to rise, because if the planet is so separated in parts and now we're so connected, it's almost as if it's like we're learning to grow out this chaos so we can see these bigger things that are moving. I don't know if that answered the question.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So hi, my name is Marilyn. We met earlier at the Gold Center. I'm a first year, and yeah, I really enjoyed the talk, learned a lot, feel really empowered by it. And I guess just one of the questions that I had is, like, during your talk, you said that, like, a lot of our imagination is almost like restricted by our perception of the past, and how it's like we have almost this illusion of progress. Correct me if I'm wrong, and it's almost in a sense that like we view our history as like a story almost, and then how that like illusion of like progress and hope is a problem. It's a problem, and how that limits our imagination. Yet at the same time, we're talking about the power that comes with story and like that hopeful narrative. I'm just wondering like how do you kind of almost they almost seem contradictory in a sense. So like how do you reconcile the idea and like what do you make sense of the two?
Absolutely. I think what I'll talk about is sort of my journey with Afrofuturism. So I dove in a lot of Afrofuturistic sort of writing and thinking, and one of the biggest valuable thing for me as an Afrofuturist is really seeing it as an epistemological way of thinking. So like breaking sort of the paradigm of linear time and past and future. And it's almost as if it's like so Afrofuturism says it's almost as if how do we look at the past to reimagine the present and future. And for me, Afrofuturism kind of thrusts me in all times in a way, where it's sort of like what the Maya Angelou says. She says anytime she steps into her room, she doesn't step as one, but she steps as 10,000s. She steps as everyone that has ever loved her ancestors. And I think that's the kind of like paradox that perhaps we are very disconnected to in terms of like being human and thinking like I woke up this morning and then I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that. It's like there's a linear sort of progression of time that absorbs how we live. And I think for us to really embrace these new epistemologies, I think one of the aspects I've come to realize is like the end of time is necessary. Time itself has to end. Not in the sort of biblical end of time, but like in a literal sense of like, if we need to imagine on a global scale, like time itself is going to have to like collapse in a way, at least be more flexible in terms of how we see the past, because we know the past is written by the winners of war. One's revolutionaries, one's terrorists. And it's like, and as we uncover the past, our relationship with the past changes as well. It's like my relationship with the past has changes like every day. If I'm like uncovering an artist and then it's like they impacted this floor and they said this and they said that, it's like I see Haiti differently or I see the world differently, and being comfortable in my conception of knowledge around what is fact. I think I'll say this. I was listening to a talk by this sculptor. I forgot his name. He just passed away. I think it was Richard Serra, I think. And he was talking about like how there was a project where this person had taken 400 pictures of paintings of trees by famous painters like Henri Matisse or Picasso. And he said that these 400 pictures of paintings that all these artists across the times have done were all different. There was no single way of drawing a tree. They were all different conceptions. And he has this sort of famous saying that says, drawing is a drawing. Or drawing is when you draw. Like it's almost as if it's like the act of drawing is what drawing is, because there's not necessarily an objective sense. But within the Western sort of canon, we tend to want to objectify and claim truth within this is the thing that we have to live for. So I think once we start to sort of dislodge this subjectivity that we are so romanticized by, which has created a lot of innovations in our world and our planet for a lot of reasons. We need to get people to step into these worlds. But I think challenging the subjective and being comfortable with the messy, as the earlier question, and this sort of complexity, evolving things are always moving, things are not static, and getting that language of transformation, I think that's what I'm getting at. And you can look at it from the point of time and space itself.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, please join me in giving one last round of applause to our speaker, Fabrice Guerrier.
Thank you.